Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm Cody Goodwin, joined here today by our fellow staff writer, Mike Rodak. Mike, Talty and I ended the last show with a few Taylor Swift references, so I feel like it's fitting that we kick off today's show with another. I got to ask, do you have a favorite Taylor Swift song?
No. Nope. Zero.
I personally prefer Cruel Summer, mostly because it's just the last one that I listened to start to finish. The reason I ask about T Swift, not exactly because that's how Talty and I ended the last show, but because it actually ties into this week's Alabama Ole Miss game. Crimson Tide hosts the Rebels on Saturday, 2:30 p.m. Central, CBS. We'll discuss that game on today's show. We'll also discuss Alabama's defense, offense, maybe even answer a few questions, a little mailbag portion of the show near the end if we've got some time. But first, I wanted to explain why we're talking about Taylor Swift again. We learned earlier this week, Lane Kiffin, the Ole Miss head coach, former Alabama offensive coordinator, is also a Taylor Swift fan, big one, in fact, prefers the deep cuts. Apparently his favorite song as of right now, or at least the one he's been listening to more recently, Castle's Crumbling, part of Taylor Swift's Speak Now album. We know this because Lane has been tweeting about it. He tends to tweet a lot during the weeks that he plays Alabama. We know he and Nick Saban have a unique relationship, unique in air quotes, because don't even know if it's like a real relationship anymore or if it's just like Lane just kind of like throwing soft grenades at Nick. Lane likes to poke at Nick. He likes to troll him. Despite being 0-4 all time against Saban in Alabama, 0-1 while at Tennessee in 2009, and then 0-3 the last 3 years while at Ole Miss. But here's what Lane's done this week. Just a short recap. He asserted that Alabama's defense is actually being called by Travaris Robinson, the cornerbacks coach, rather than defensive coordinator Kevin Steele. After Saban confirmed that Steele is the one calling the plays, Lane was asked about that comment specifically and said, among other things, quote, "It's not a secret that people in these buildings know each other, so we obviously get some information that way too," end quote. He's probably alluding to the former Alabama staffers that are on his staff now, like Wes Neighbors and Charlie Weiss Jr., but it was worded in a way that maybe kind of sort of suggests that he has a mole in Tuscaloosa. Probably not, but it's just kind of like, why'd you word it that way? Then he takes to Twitter, or X, where he quote tweeted his dog Juice. He expressed gratitude for Saban adding him to his staff. And then he also references Castle's Crumbling, that Taylor Swift song. I think I know the answer to this, but Mike, have you heard of this Castle's Crumbling song?
I have. In fact, I mean, I said I don't have a favorite T Swift song. Doesn't mean I don't hear them or listen or know any of them. And I've certainly have heard Castle's Crumbling. In fact, I was surprised. I think it was Dan Wetzel's column this week on Yahoo Sports. He called it a deep cut. Like I feel like that's more mainstream. Castle's Crumbling, and reading the lyrics, I'm like, man, I can think of that song in my head. I can maybe even start singing it myself. But I mean, there's two different approaches that we see. Nick Saban not on Twitter or X and not quoting Taylor Swift songs and not talking about Ole Miss's play calling, and then you have the other side of it, with Lane. And I don't know if it means anything for the game, but it's fun, at least to watch. I personally think people probably made a little bit too big of a deal over the coordinator thing in terms of Lane's motives and this random unannounced Sunday press conference, and whether he was just trying to get under Saban's skin. I don't know if I read into all the conspiracy theories there, but I don't think Lane minded kind of throwing that out there and having it be another thing that Saban had to deal with this week. So yeah, I probably fall somewhere in the middle. Like I don't know if Lane is quite as disruptive as some people think. But I also think he's obviously more fun than Saban is. And again, that makes a game like this kind of fun.
Yeah. Which makes me like, this is the first time I've seen, like you kind of know from the outside, like in Big 10, Big 12 country, that Lane likes to poke at Saban. But then like you see it up close and it's like you can kind of appreciate like the, just the little subtleties here. And like really like this Castle's Crumbling song, like the title in itself is like hilarious. But then you read the lyrics and the lyrics. I don't know if our listener knows the lyrics. I'm going to do like here's one of them, right? Like I once had an empire in a golden age. I was held up so high. I used to be great. They used to cheer when they saw my face. Now I fear that I've fallen from grace. Like that is, dude, like you are, like you're not just poking the bear, like you're taking a knife and like really trying to stab at it a little bit.
Or is he poking fun at the idea that Saban is on the way out? Because that's been Lane's shtick the last couple games, is that he likes to come out before the game, and he has this jousting match with Paul Feinbaum publicly where he says, Paul, you're poking at Saban, and you're only going to make him upset, and goat fuel, and it's all it's fake news in his mind that Alabama's dynasty is crumbling. That's what he said the last couple of years. And we didn't really hear much of that from Lane in his press conferences. And then we had the tweet. So you could interpret it different ways, and I think that's kind of what Lane likes is not having it be entirely clear. And it's kind of have a subtle joke basically. And at the end of the day, like I think, from the outside, people probably see Lane as like this quote machine, and he's going to say outrageous things, and a Rex Ryan type. Yeah, he really isn't. I mean, you listen to him; his press conferences are pretty boring sometimes. You can ask him questions, and it's not like he's going to be inflammatory, but he does kind of make this subtle stuff every now and then. And then sometimes it is he throws it out there right before the game 2 years ago in Tuscaloosa. He had the same approach the entire week where he's talking about we respect Alabama, great team, blah, blah, blah. And then he does his pregame interview with CBS and says, get your popcorn ready. Which in hindsight, I'm sure he regrets because they came out in that game and, failed on a bunch of fourth downs and it was over within a quarter. But usually you don't get those kind of crazy statements from Lane Kiffin. I think that part of him is probably overrated.
That makes sense. But that leads me to like my last question of this opening segment here. You've covered all of these games, like the last 3 games. You've seen a fair amount of Lane Kiffin over the last few years. What's your favorite way that he's kind of poked at Saban or trolled him a little bit? Most memorable, favorite, whichever one.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he has as much as people think. Like he kind of does it through Feinbaum, and there's that kind of back and forth that he has with Feinbaum, and some of it seems like it's a little bit contrived. And then there's been other clips that I've seen Kiffin and Feinbaum, I think it was at SEC Media Days, if I'm not mistaken, where no, like it seemed legit. Like Kiffin was upset with Paul about X, Y, and Z. So again, I can't like even think of a time off my head that Lane's really trolled Saban, and maybe have amnesia at this point from covering a few seasons of this. But again, my take on it is that the Lane Saban back and forth is overrated from Kiffin's standpoint. That I don't think he does quite as much as some people think on the outside.
Yeah, and I guess it's not so much like a back and forth, because like I don't know, like Saban has to worry about some of the small things that he says sometimes, but like I don't know, it's not like Saban goes out of his way to like, post a tweet or say small things here and there. Like it's really just kind of Lane just like, hey, like, just can I get a sliver of your attention for a split second? And I mean, clearly he did because he had to address the Kevin Steele thing earlier this week.
I mean, the Lane thing within the last couple of years that comes to mind in terms of him going after another coach or another program is Texas A&M. When he came out and started talking about A&M, having a salary cap or whatever it was, and paying players, and then you had Jimbo come back and call him a clown act and kind of call Saban a clown act, and then after that you had Saban, the very public thing with Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M bought their whole class. So that's like a true back and forth firing volleys at each other. And I think Lane's done that multiple times with Jimbo and A&M. I can't think of a time that's been like that, between Lane and Alabama, which I think part of that is I think Lane wants to be the head coach of Alabama one day. And, obviously you want to stay within the good graces of the people that have power here. And I think that has to be part of Lane's thinking in all this, that, he doesn't want to mess up something that, if he wins this game on Saturday, that discussion, that talk is only going to grow. Is Lane Kiffin the next head coach at Alabama?
Yeah. Yeah. As a side note, now I feel like I'm going to be paying a little bit closer attention when Ole Miss plays A&M, just because Bobby Petrino is calling plays now for A&M and not Jimbo Fisher, and I just picture them meeting up at midfield pregame and Lane being like, it's a little unfortunate you had to give up plays. Like, could never be me. And then A&M probably wins by 2 scores anyway because Petrino's normally pretty good, although they ended up losing last week, which was a little odd. That was the opening segment. We can talk some actual Alabama football now. Ole Miss presents all kinds of challenges for the Crimson Tide. They're coming in 4th nationally, 52 points a game, 11th nationally in total offense, more than 500 yards a game. This is an insane unit that is really going to test and stretch and stress Alabama's defense. You wrote about Alabama's defense for today. Because one of the more unique, interesting subplots is Pete Golding is making his return to Tuscaloosa. He was the defensive coordinator here 2018 through last season, took the same job at Ole Miss. You kind of wrote a story looking at the early returns of Kevin Steele being back at Alabama and kind of how it compares to what we saw from Pete Golding's defense over the last 5 years. What were kind of the big picture takeaways from what you were able to find?
Yeah, I mean, it's a small sample size to begin with Steele. Obviously, it's only been 3 games, and the Texas game is really the one where you can take the most away from because of the level of competition. And obviously, there were still a lot of the familiar things that fans wanted to get mad about with Pete Golding were still existing, within the Texas game, whether it was, bad matchups in the secondary and, receivers taking advantage of those, which Texas did. Penalties, which Alabama had a couple of pass interferences. They had the offsides penalty that basically sealed it at the end. There's obviously no pass rush when you have Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell. They weren't able to get a sack in that game, and that was something, fans would get mad at Pete Golding and why you're dropping Will Anderson into coverage and why, you have a player like that. Aren't you getting all the sacks and the pressure? And, just the overall output. And yeah, I mean, part of it was Jalen Miller throws an interception. Texas has the ball inside the 20-yard line, and, they scored right away. And that's, 7 points right there. And, plus Miller's interception early in the game too, probably affected the defense. But yeah, it was good against South Florida. Obviously, the offense was a much, much bigger problem. Middle Tennessee was fine. It was good. But, they just haven't played anybody yet other than Texas. So Ole Miss, like you mentioned, is right up there in terms of some of the best offenses in the country. You ask Lane, and he says, their offense has issues because of some of the injuries that they have, but they're still scoring over 50 points a game, 526 yards. Again, sample size is small. They played Mercer, they played Tulane, they played Georgia Tech. So Ole Miss hasn't really played a SEC defense either, but that's kind of what this time of the year is in college football. But overall, I don't know if you can say right now that Alabama is better off without Pete Golding, and that's I think something that even Saban talked about. I mean, it's his defense. It's his call at the end of the day. What's going to happen on the field? He is the final say, and people probably hated on Pete a little too much for the defense that finished second in the SEC, most of the years that he was here. I think people want it to be first. They want it to be better than Georgia's. They want it to be like Georgia's even, and it wasn't. And that's, a problem obviously with Pete, and we'll have to see if he can do something better at Ole Miss. But again, I don't know if what we've seen so far from Kevin Steele this year is better. And then there's the issue that, Lane was kind of getting at with the play calling on defense. And, even though Saban said Steele's still the defensive coordinator, Saban was still pretty open about saying that there was issues getting the calls in, which is a little unusual to hear him say that. And again, that was at times an issue with Pete. So again, that's one of those things that carries over from previous to the new regime on defense. And the bottom line is, I don't know if you can say that it's better right now.
Yeah. What do you think are the biggest challenges this, Alabama's defense has got? I've got my own ideas, but I'm kind of curious to see, what do you think? Like, what's the first line of defense? What's the first key that they got to, make sure they figure out if they want to try and at least slow down? I don't know if you could stop Ole Miss, but I think slow them down maybe.
Yeah, I mean, Ole Miss isn't really as high flying of an offense, if that's the right term, as Tennessee. I mean, they both run really fast. But last year, like Tennessee was able to get the downfield plays to Hyatt, and they have the wide splits, and Ole Miss is still they're an up tempo team, but they really like to run the ball, and so it's getting lined up and getting your defense is going to be tired because you're trying to stop the run play after play after play, and it worked for Ole Miss last year. I'd say for a good chunk of that game, Junkins has 135 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 25 carries. Zach Evans didn't do much in last year's game, but he's done some things for him so far this year. So I'd imagine that Ole Miss comes out and tries to establish the run. And again, they've done a pretty good job of doing that under Lane Kiffin. And it's a case of Alabama's run defense has been pretty good so far this year. I don't know if there's been a test like they've had in Ole Miss so far, and that's where I'd expect Lane to try to get after them first of all. And we'll have to see what they try to do through the air with Jackson Dart and the receivers that they have. I wouldn't say it's quite as plentiful the weapons they have receiving wise as Texas had, but Lane's still good at scheming guys open, and it's something that the secondary is going to need to prepare for.
Yeah. I think that the issues that Lane, says that his offense has is they've been hurt. They've been banged up. Quinshon Judkins, I don't think, has been healthy all season. Still been moderately productive, but not the guy that ran for 1,500 yards and 16 touchdowns last year. Ole Miss they were one of the portal teams last year. They didn't quite overhaul it like Colorado did, and I don't know that they accepted double digits quite like Florida State did. But they got a tight end from Memphis who I don't think has played yet. Supposed to be really productive. I know they were excited about him. I think he was back practicing this week. If I looked at the Rebels 247 website, Inside the Rebels on 247 Sports. They've got a receiver who's been banged up that I know that they're really excited about. So those are probably the issues that just like they don't have the full stable of weapons, or they may not have the full stable of weapons. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how or if Alabama is able to take advantage of that. On the flip side, Pete Golding being the defensive coordinator for Ole Miss, we know of Alabama's offensive issues, which we'll talk about a little bit more here in just a second. But I'm kind of curious should we expect almost the exact same thing that Golding did at Alabama for the last 5 years? Or what are you expecting from a Pete Golding-led Ole Miss defense on Saturday?
I think it's going to be tougher to do what Alabama did results-wise the last few years under Golding at Ole Miss because you don't have the same personnel. And that's something where, even I think Saban alluded to it on Monday, that it's a little bit different in terms of what they do because the personnel is different. And I can't sit here and say exactly, what the scheme is. It's different, but Ole Miss like to do a lot of the 3-3 stack, I believe. Under their former coordinators, there's multiple, and that allowed Alabama to run a little bit. Same thing with Arkansas. We'd like to run that defense, so you get into a little bit more of Alabama's 4-2-5 nickel and a little bit of different alignment and approach. Where again, the technicalities of it I think bore people, but it's going to look different. The results for so far for Ole Miss have been okay. I think they're 66th in the country in yards allowed. Tulane was able to do some things offensively against them, which Tulane's a good team. That's something I think people forget. Tulane's a top 5 team at the time. But they don't have a Will Anderson. They don't have a Brian Branch. They don't have some of the players that Alabama's had under Golding. And, that's just going to make it harder for them.
Yeah, 100%. Alabama's offense. So that's what I wrote about this week. And no, we didn't necessarily plan that. But I was basically looking at kind of like trends, things they were doing well, things they weren't doing well, things that they should maybe do more of. We know that we've written plenty about the offensive line struggles, right? 12 sacks in 3 games, 12 sacks allowed in 3 games. But I also found this. And I'm going to rattle off a few thoughts here, and I'm kind of curious what you think about the whole thing. Alabama, and you wrote about this a little bit earlier too, not bad at running the ball, especially on first down. When you adjust for sacks, Alabama's rushed, by my count, 594 yards on 105 attempts this season. That's good for 198 a game, 5.66 yards per carry. Quarterbacks especially been pretty good when they've been added to the run game. They've rushed, the quarterbacks 191 yards on 24 attempts, right around 8 yards a carry. It's pretty good. More than that, on 105 of the 105 rushing attempts, 64 have gone for 3 yards or more. So 61% of the time, Alabama has rushed for 3 yards. I think they'd take that more often than not. They've also had big rushing play, which is 10 yards or more on 22 attempts, which is 21%. So basically 1 every 5 rushing attempts is 10 yards or more, which I think is something that they would also take. In addition to that, Alabama's pretty good at running the ball on first down. 51 first down rushing attempts, 288 yards, 5.6 a carry, about the same. But that's important because Alabama is 15 for 21 on third downs that require 5 yards or fewer, but 5 for 21 on third downs that require 6 yards or more. I know that they wanted the run game to be kind of this dominant force, and I wouldn't exactly call those insane dominating numbers, but Alabama's been pretty good at running the ball. There are more efficient and more powerful run game teams out there, but I think based on the numbers that they've not been bad. I don't know. What do you think?
I think if you're going to be a running team, you have to be better than that. If you're not going to be a team that can win, with passing, then you got to be dominant in running the ball. I don't think they have. I think they've been good. But Alabama being middle of the pack or even, upper 2/3 of the country is not good enough to be where they want to be. I mean, if they want to win a national championship, you got to have something that's going really well for you. And I don't think it's going to be their passing game. And at this point, I would still have doubts about the running game. And I'm just looking back, this USF game that they just played, you have the 19-yard run to begin the game. And then, let's look Buckner's third possession, first down play, the first play of the drive, McClellan up the middle for 1 yard. So that puts them in a 2nd and 9, which Buckner actually converted to Isaiah Bond. All right, so they have a first down after that. Roydell Williams up the middle, 1 yard. Another 2nd and 9, incomplete. 3rd and 9, incomplete. So that put Buckner in a tough spot, 3rd and long. You should have done better against USF's defense, but that's just what it is. So then another drive, Buckner actually gets a first down scrambling. So then they have a 1st and 10. Roydell Williams loses 2 yards in first down. All right, so then you're behind the 8 ball again. 2nd and 12, incomplete. 3rd and 12, no gain. Another punt. So you sense the theme here. And then Buckner's 4th drive, first down, Jace McClellan, rush, no gain. So then you're at a 2nd and 10. The first down running game in the first half against South Florida was not good. And that was putting Buckner in some pretty long spots that, for the most part, he didn't get out of. There were a few times that he did. Even later in that drive, so that McClellan for no gain, they were able to get 2 first downs after that. And then they have a first down near midfield. McClellan rushed to the left, 2 yards. Again, I don't think he got it done really until, late in the second quarter. That first half drive going to halftime, 29 seconds left. Most teams are just going to take a knee. Saban really doesn't believe in that. So he lines up and, they run the ball a few times and, they get 10 yards total, ended up going to halftime. It really wasn't until the second half when they started kind of breaking through a little bit in the running game. And, I think it was really that end of the third quarter, really beginning of the fourth quarter, just kind of looking back at it, even fourth quarter, 1st and 10 from the Alabama 22-yard line with 11:48 left in the game. Jace McClellan, rush up the middle, loss of 1 yard. And then you're in 2nd and 11. And Ty Simpson completed the pass for a first down. Next play, rush to the left, Roydell Williams, 3 yards. So if you're getting -2, 0, 1, 2, even 3 yards on first down running, I think it's going to be really tough with the quarterbacks that they have to consistently make things happen on 2nd and long and 3rd and long to move the chains and to score the ball. So it's going to need to be a lot better than what they've done.
Yeah, and I think the numbers bear that out too. Just that third down efficiency when it's when they need 5 yards to move the chains on third down, they're pretty good. When it's
Mhm.
6 yards or more, they're not. So that's yeah. The rushing game has been fine. I think it could be better. I agree with you
Mhm.
there. And it needs to be better clearly if these quarterbacks are going to take advantage, which is why I think like it's you know involving the quarterbacks in the run game. And now that we know Jalen Milroe's QB1 moving forward, like involving him in the run game, like here's some fun numbers on Jalen Milroe. He's got 139 rushing yards on 15 attempts, again, after you adjust for sacks. Um, you know, on designed runs, like only five design runs for Jalen Milroe, which is crazy when you see that speed that he has, right? So of the five design runs, about 45 yards, on scrambles, 95 yards. Like, so the guy can make things happen when things break down, but also like he's very efficient, almost 9 yards a pop basically when you just design the run for him. And I wonder if that's like, I don't wonder, like I know that needs to be a crucial part of Alabama's offense moving forward. I guess I just wonder if we're actually going to see more of it. Because I think like including the quarterbacks in the run game, and the fun part about designing an offense like this is that like Ty Simpson has shown that he can do similar things. He's not nearly as fast as Jalen Milroe, but the guy is not afraid to take, a run pass option and keep it and tuck it for his own, and he'll get, 5, 6, 7 yards up the field. Like he's not afraid to do that. So if something were to happen to Milroe or they feel like they need to make a quarterback change, I think if they can design an offense that includes some quarterback runs, designed runs, option plays, whatever the case may be, and they have to go to Simpson at some point, you don't have to really change a whole lot of the offense, like it's just, we've seen it with our eyes that like Milroe is insanely fast. And when he decides to tuck the ball, it can be a very effective thing for the offense. I guess, yeah, I know that needs to be part of the offense. I wonder if we're going to see it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and it was something that Reese did at Notre Dame with their quarterbacks, Ian Book, and I have to think back even, before that, but it was something that was part of the Notre Dame offense. And, um, I'm thinking back to Jalen Milroe's freshman year when he played a little bit at Alabama. When the game was over and Bryce, was on the bench or whatever, the Mercer game, for instance, 2021, Jalen Milroe's freshman year, he came in, threw one pass, but ran 7 times for 33 yards. Um, you know, the New Mexico State game that year, threw for 5 passes, ran 5 times. And we saw that freshman year, they were running basically the triple option with him or, read option type stuff. And that was kind of what he was as a freshman. Jalen Milroe was a very run oriented quarterback. And the big critique from Saban whenever it was when he was playing those games or when he was in the spring game going into a sophomore year was we need to make Jalen Milroe into a better passer. Because that's really, I think, where Saban falls philosophically. I don't think Saban believes that you can win big in college football by running that offense. The triple option, having the quarterback run 15 times a game or more, and that the defense is just going to creep up and they're going to be able to stop that. So, I do think you can include some elements of design runs with Jalen Milroe. I think you're obviously going to get the benefit when he's in there of a play breaking down, a bad snap, as we've seen a couple times already this year, and he picks up the ball and makes guys miss and kind of improvises. Uh, but I still think that they are going to try to run this offense, um, you know, with a pass first mindset from their quarterback, at least, where that's, I think, the way that they, um, want to win. I'm just looking back at a quote from Saban in 2021. He says, "Our philosophy of not having a quarterback run a lot, unless it's a scramble type play, is something that is helpful because hopefully that guy doesn't get hurt. That's kind of an NFL thing for me. That guy can play with consistency and you can win then at throwing the ball. You don't have to have the quarterback run all the time to have an effective team." So I think philosophically, I don't know if Saban's on board with having Milroe just, Josh Allen style, just slam his body into people every play. They might get to the point where that's what they kind of need to do offensively, but I just I have a hard time seeing them winning big that way.
I think it's something that they need to at least think about. I'm sure, like, we're not groundbreaking revelations here. I'm sure this is something that is being discussed inside, Alabama's football offices if it's not been discussed already. But just you see the effectiveness of what he can do when he makes something out of nothing. You see the numbers that show the effectiveness when it's actually like, hey, here, take the ball and run it. I wonder if it's something that they can do more. Speaking of Milroe, also pretty good on deep passes this year. I know that there was a question coming in on passes where the ball travels 20 plus yards downfield, 7 for 11, 262 yards and 4 touchdowns. Maybe do more of that. I don't know if the offensive line is going to give them enough time to do more of that because they're just not good, but at least they haven't been good the last 2 weeks, especially, but really all season. But just something else to think about. One other revelation, and maybe this was just for my own kick, but I thought it was interesting and worth tracking. 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, 2 receivers, 1 running back. Alabama's pretty good there. So they've got, through 3 games, 1,100 total yards of offense on 191 plays, about 5.7 yards per play for Alabama's offense. Cool. When in 12 personnel, they've run 78 plays for 523 yards. That's 6.7 yards per play. Alabama's gaining a whole another yard per play more with a second tight end on the field. Maybe do more of that. They run the ball a lot more than they pass out of 12 personnel, which is probably by design, right? You can kind of put a pseudo jumbo package on there. But like, we've been screaming this since the preseason. Like, maybe do a little bit, like, try to figure out how to utilize passing situations out of there. Like, that can, Saban wants a play action pass game. Maybe that's where you do it. But like, I make 12 personnel your base personnel. I don't know. Like, clearly it's working, more so in the run game, but clearly it's working, right?
Yeah, I mean, like they hit the CJ Dupree play, a tie down the field. That kind of, was kind of the turning point in that game against South Florida. Nyblack, technically you can count him as a tight end. Like they're in 12 personnel when Nyblack's out there, but he functions in some ways as like a big slot receiver. He's a hybrid body type. So, I think if you're in 12 personnel, if Nyblack's one of those 2 guys, it gives him the best of both worlds as long as he's can effectively run block if they need him to. But I think what the idea would be is put Nyblack and Danny Lewis out there, or Nyblack and Robbie Oots, and have one of your better blocking tight ends out there. That might mean CJ Dupree plays less, which we've already kind of seen. But Dupree's more of a receiving threat than he is a really good blocker. So it's trying to mix and match different guys there. And again, not give away the play, because if you have Nyblack and Dupree out there, you're screaming pass. If you have Lewis and Oots, you're screaming run, and that kind of indicates which direction you're going. And I think the question too is Reese faces and Saban faces is our second tight end better than our third receiver, and who has the better capability of making a big play? Which historically for Alabama, the last 5 or 6 years, it's absolutely been their third receiver, has been the more talented, explosive player, has meant more to the offense. That's probably less true now because, as we talked about in previous shows, like it's not the same at wide receiver. But you could still make the case that it's having, let's say, Malik Benson out there instead of Danny Lewis is probably giving you a better shot to have a deep passing game and keeping defenses honest. With if it's Benson and Burton and Bond versus just Burton and Bond and Lewis and Dupree, you're limiting your options a little bit. But I think they're still going to use both. I think they're going to use 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end. I think they're going to use 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers. We saw some of the 2 running back stuff against Texas. I think ultimately, if you're stuck in one personnel group, you're going to become predictable. So, the best option for them, I think, is still to mix and match a little bit.
Yeah, no, totally agree with you there. But clearly the 12 personnel is working. I guess I wonder how much more they lean into it moving forward, because I think the best version of this offense includes a healthy dose of 12 personnel. And I'm kind of curious to just see how they continue to mix and match that. I'm also really intrigued by the 21 personnel, the pony personnel. Because a couple of the things they were trying to do against Texas while using 2 running backs on the field, it looked like it would have worked if the execution was fully there. I know that Roydell Williams, he hauled in a pass that was just a little off the mark, and if it had been on the mark, probably a walk-in touchdown. Same thing with Jace McClellan on a deep kind of what looked like a wheel route outside of the backfield. So you can see kind of some of the things that they're trying to do with these guys, and if those plays hit, one, how much does that change the Alabama-Texas game, and two, it's another thing on film that defenses moving forward have to worry about. You can read all of what Mike wrote about Alabama's defense on Bama 247. You can read what I wrote all about the offense on Bama 247. But really, Mike, I think, Bama just needs to run the ball on first down, call some design runs for Jalen, utilize 12 personnel and run it again, and then chuck it deep. And if they do that, I think the offense will be fine, right?
It's a lot. You're right. We'll see. I mean, I don't know if all this renewed confidence in Jalen Milroe and everybody kind of rallying behind him now really changes anything. Like, he's still Jalen Milroe, and there's still good parts about his game, and there's still flaws to his game. And I don't think anything's going to magically go away on Saturday. So we'll have to see. I think the better chance for them to get better is the offensive line, because they should be playing better given what they have. And that doesn't mean Caden Proctor turns into Orlando Pace right away at left tackle, but when you have Booker and Latham, and I thought McLaughlin and Dalcourt are fine in the middle, you should be doing better things than they are now. I know that one position sometimes can break everything down, but I think the ceiling for the offensive line is higher. And so if things do change quickly, I think it's going to be in that area more than it will Milroe all of a sudden, becoming something that he probably isn't. I think you have what you have in Milroe. I think the offensive line, you have something better than what you've seen.
Yeah. And Talty and I kind of touched on that in the last show. Just, hate to pick on the true freshman, but Caden Proctor has very clearly visibly struggled the last 2 weeks. Really, I think if you really want to nitpick all the way back to the first week too, maybe that's where the first signs of his struggles first started to surface. And you wonder what that means for Alabama moving forward. You wonder if they reshuffle. You wonder if they just plug Book back into left guard. Does that make a difference? I think the most optimistic view is that, one, they won't play a defensive front quite as talented as Texas for the rest of the year until they see Georgia, if they see Georgia in the SEC championship game. And then the continued most optimistic look is that Booker was not there to help Proctor against South Florida. So how much does that make a difference? But also, I wonder if they start to shuffle with personnel a little bit. You and I were talking about this leaving Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, do you try Elijah Pritchett? Here's a thought. Do you kick Booker out to tackle, plug Ferguson in at left guard and try to roll that way? Do you put Book back on the right side and maybe put Ferguson in so you can try to just get some of your best offensive line, all 5 of your best offensive linemen in? I don't know. They've got some decisions that they've got to make, especially if the issues continue to persist. Ole Miss has a good pass rush, not a great pass rush. They got 10 sacks through the first 3 games. We were joking that it would probably double after they play Alabama on Saturday. We'll see. But I think that, if they don't make changes, then the problems are probably deeper than just, the offensive line giving up 12 sacks in 3 games. So that's another thing that we are going to be monitoring on Saturday. Got a few minutes left. Put out a roll call for mailbag questions for this week. We got a few, not a ton, but I wanted to parse through and pose a few of these last part of the podcast. Speaking of offensive line play, here is a question from Bama with Love. Aside from the offensive line play, because they think that would be number one, what has been the biggest surprise with this Alabama team, positive or negative? Mike, I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, I think we had this before the Texas game or the South Florida game, and I said the deep passing game, because that was the one thing we thought was going to be lost going from Bryce Young in what we saw, let's say 2 years ago, even with Jamison Williams and John Mechie, to what they have now. And that's been fine. I mean, obviously, South Florida game, it didn't really show up. They had that long attempt from Buckner to Burton that didn't connect. But they didn't really try it a ton against South Florida. But Texas and Middle Tennessee State, I mean, Milroe was more explosive through the air than even Quinn Ewers was. He had more long pass plays than Texas did, and that's again maybe part of the problem with Milroe is that it's kind of all or nothing. It's boom or bust, and I don't know if I was necessarily expecting that out of Milroe. I think we had a discussion before the season that actually statistically last year he was not a great deep ball thrower in his limited
Not
time.
at all.
And I think there was kind of this popular opinion going into the year that he had a really strong arm, he had a great deep ball, could he make the underneath throws? And um, that actually, I guess, is proven to be true because he's gotten better as a deep ball thrower. But there's still been some questions on kind of uncorking some of these shorter passes and having the right velocity and touch on them. That there's been some issues there, and you can tell, mechanically they've tried to clean him up, and his legs are still a little bit all over the place in the pocket at sometimes. And is he going through all of his reads? Is he tucking the ball too early? That was always an issue with Milroe, in spring games and the time that he's played. No, that stuff's been all right. I think the deep ball's been there, whether it's been to Bond or Burton, Black for that touchdown. So I don't think that's the biggest problem, but it's still a matter of consistently throwing the ball and having a passing offense that you can kind of rely on, especially if you're trailing in a game. I don't know if they have that, but there's some capacity for a deep passing game.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And the stats bear out that he's pretty good short, like basically screen passes or passes behind the line of scrimmages from Pro Football Focus. 3 of 4 completions, passes 0 to 9 yards downfield. He's 15 and 19 with a couple drops. Obviously the deep ball, 7 of 11 for 220, 262, 4 touchdowns. Where he struggles is that like intermediate passing, right? Like 10 to 19 yards. And I don't know if that's like a route development issue. So he just doesn't, the offensive line isn't giving him enough time for the receivers to get open in that part of the field, or, before they're able to get open in that part of the field, that's when he tucks it and runs it, or he gets sacked. Like there's a lot of different issues as to why that middle portion of the field continues to be a struggle for him. But I think if he's able to tap into that a little bit, and maybe that's where tight ends can help him out a little bit, right? Like go run a 12-yard curl and just sit in the zone if they play it. Like, does that help him a little bit? Can that really unlock the rest of this offense? I think, again, that maybe falls back on the offensive line a little bit. We keep talking about how, like, if the offensive line plays better, I think the floor of this offense gets significantly higher because we've seen some really good things, and I think we all can kind of see what they can be. But it's kind of, can the offensive line get better? And 2, like, can everybody else execute if they're able to do that? But yeah, I think he's been fine. Not great. Obviously he's had some bad moments, but yeah, the deep ball, that was not something he was good at last year. And so I'm in agreement with you there. That's been a little bit surprising. I think for me, the run defense, if only because like just the unknown really about Alabama's defensive line depth coming in, Deontay Lawson taking the reins. I think he's been spectacular. And I think this could be a really big game for him too. Like if he's able to kind of, contain Jackson Dart a little bit and really kind of get the defense in the right situations to, slow down Ole Miss. I think this could be a really big game for Deontay Lawson too, but he's been really good, and really the run defense as a whole. I know that statistically speaking, they've given up 118 per game. That's, 57th nationally, but they gave up 105 to a Texas team that no longer has Bijan, but like we know Sark loves to run the ball, and the fact that they, didn't run the ball really well or felt like they had to go away from it against Alabama's defense, I thought was kind of telling. And then obviously against Middle Tennessee State, they allowed 3 yards of carry, but yeah, pleasantly surprised by Alabama's run defense just because I wasn't sure who the characters were going to be. And now that we've kind of seen it, it's like, okay, like these guys can stop the run. I don't know if they can stop the run when they need to, right? Because Texas bled the clock out, but they've shown that, as long as they can contain mobile quarterbacks, which will be a challenge against Ole Miss, they're pretty good against the run. Another question. This one's kind of interesting. Outside of Proctor and Downs, what freshmen do you think are playing the biggest roles by the end of the year?
I still think Justice Haynes is going to get on the field. I think that's something where, might depend on the results of the next few games and kind of where things are headed. If they lose to Ole Miss or if they lose to A&M and things, the goals of the season, so to speak, aren't really in front of them anymore, I think it makes more sense to play Justice Haynes, and it makes more sense to play other younger players that are going to be around next year. And I don't know if that will be a disservice or an offense to Jace McClellan and Rodale Williams. They've both been really serviceable, reliable guys for almost 4 years now because they're both seniors. But the future, I think, at running back for Alabama is either going to be Justice Haynes or you're going to have to find somebody else. And I think it's certainly there's a lot of promise with Justice Haynes. And we both saw some of the tweets that his dad was responding to, and I think in the NIL era or the transfer portal era, like you have to be careful with that as a coach. You can't just say you're stuck here for 3 years and you're gonna have to develop before you see the field. You have to be weary of guys leaving and having a 5-star running back walk out the door because you didn't want to play him right away. And I think Saban gets that. And that's why when he was asked yesterday, about some of the younger running backs, he did mention that he thinks they'll see the field as the season goes on. And obviously those snaps will have to come from somewhere. And, it's probably going to come from McClellan and Roydell. So, again, I think we're going to see him. I don't know how much in this game, but depending on how things go, maybe by October.
Yeah, I think, and I wonder, the more I think about it, the more I wonder if it's like a pass protection issue, because I think Saban really wants guys out on the field who he knows can do a lot of different things. Obviously that with the offensive line issues, he really wants the 2 veteran guys in there, especially against Texas. And then to a lesser degree, because of the game script against South Florida, like you want guys in there that are going to help protect the quarterback when they're going to try and throw the ball. So I wonder if that's part of the issue. I'm in agreement with you. I'd like to see a little bit more Justice Haynes just because it's like, you talked about this guy. You have continued to talk about this guy who, is somebody you're high on, is somebody that you believe will have a greater role as the season goes along. He said it again this week. And so it's just kind of like, are we going to see him? Because we only see him on special teams. And what does that mean? Like he's getting used to game speed, but like, let's put the rock in his hands and see what he can do with it. I'm going to go a little off the wall here and say James Smith on the D line. Thought he got an opportunity against South Florida, and it's just South Florida. The reason he got that opportunity probably because Jaheim Otis wasn't playing, but he made the most of it, right? Like he 2 pressures, believe he recorded a tackle as well. It makes me wonder what kind of opportunity he'll get this weekend. Like to think that he'll get a few more snaps. Can you parlay that opportunity into something more as the season goes along? They need to continue to build some defensive line depth. I'm not saying James Smith is going to be a game wrecker or, alter the way, even a drive wrecker at that part. But like, can this be a guy that turns into a 20-25 snap a game guy that comes in and gives you good juice on the defensive line, contribute a pressure here and there, maybe wreck a play here and there. I liked what I saw on the rewatch out of him. Pleasantly surprised looking back over the box score. And I think that's a guy that, not only do I think he can, but I think he maybe is somebody, if he's going to get more opportunities, that Alabama kind of needs to, come along a little bit more just to help with that D-line depth. So James Smith on the D-line, Justice Haynes at running back. Last question here for you. Give me one key. This one's from me. This isn't from our board. Although we will try and do more mailbag questions. So please pay attention when I call a roll call or however I phrase it moving forward, because we just didn't get a lot of interaction for various reasons, but we'll try another mailbag podcast later. But last question for me before we wrap up today's show, Mike, give me the most important key to Alabama beating Ole Miss this weekend.
Jalen Milroe not throwing interceptions. I think that's the main reason why he was benched. We know that sticks with Saban, and there's 10 points that resulted from those, and obviously bad field position that they gave away, and that's been Milroe's MO. I mean, when he's been throwing the ball, not just this season, but going back to last season, there's been a high degree of I'll say probability that there's going to be an interception, and that showed up from the get-go, that Texas game, and that that obviously can demoralize a defense and demoralize a team when you go out there and your quarterback's giving the ball right back. And that's something they're still going to need to guard against. We hear it all the time from Saban, don't be a shooting guard, be a point guard. And if Milroe can safely distribute the ball to players, then that seems to be what Saban really wants right now, more than him trying to force the ball into a window that isn't there, or not see a player that's not there, which I think was probably more the case against Texas. Guy peeling off the outside coverage as it was. So if he can avoid that, then they'll be in a good spot. If he starts throwing 3 picks in the first half, what does Alabama do from there? I mean, do they go to Ty Simpson? I think there will be calls for that. I wouldn't rule it out. As much as Saban's kind of rallying behind Milroe again, saying he's our guy, he has nothing to prove, that would be a dire situation for this team. If there's a few first half turnovers and all of a sudden the season's on the line in the second half, do you stick with Milroe or do you go with Simpson? That's like, those are the scenarios I think they have to talk through the next 48 hours here and figure out what their plan would be.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And kind of quietly, I've kind of, I don't know if this quietly, it's on a podcast, 1,000 people are going to hear this. The more I rewatched the South Florida game, the more I was like, okay, I see it. Ty Simpson's getting snaps. He's getting more comfortable. He's getting his head ripped off because the offensive line just isn't great. But I see it. Like, I can see where this could, if the offensive line was maybe better, or maybe if they begin to play better, I could see that he would be the guy that maybe Saban would turn toward. But because the offensive line just hasn't shown that they're up to the task, having a guy like Milroe who can create a little bit more makes a lot more sense and gives the offense, I think, a lot more opportunity for the short term. We'll see if that changes at all. But like, the more I've seen, the more I watched it, the more I was like, yeah, like I see it. And that was one thing Talty and I talked about too, just like, hadn't really seen it, right? Like, he played like 38 total snaps over the last 2 years, Ty Simpson did. And then he played 40 against South Florida. And it's like, hey, he looked okay. Like, not great, but he looked okay. Like, I can see the little things that made him a 5-star. I'll give you my key before we head out. Contain Jackson Dart. He is obviously a very, very good passer. He's a guy that he can orchestrate Lane Kiffin's offense. But I think one thing that Alabama needs to keep an eye on is that this guy is not afraid to run the ball, and he showed that against Georgia Tech. So Ole Miss may be down a couple of key pass catchers. Quinshon Judkins may not be at fully 100%, but Jackson Dart against Georgia Tech rushed for 136 yards on 14 attempts, about 10 yards a pop. You look back at the South Florida game, Byron Brown, when you adjust for sacks, ran for over 100 yards, a lot of them on scrambles. So can Alabama's defensive front keep Jackson Dart in front of him? Can they keep him in the pocket, make him go through his reads before they're able to get home? Can they kind of squeeze the pocket a little bit to make life a little bit more difficult? If he's able to get outside the tackles and run a little bit, could be a really long day for Alabama's defense. So I tend to trust the secondary to do enough of the job for the pass rush to get home a little bit, or at least, play contain a little bit. But Jackson Dart's a guy that can kill them with his legs. And I think if they let him get loose a few too many times, it's only going to make a really good Ole Miss offense that much better. So I think that's, coming back to Deontay Lawson, middle of that defense could be a really big game for him if they're able to keep Jackson Dart in check. If not, we could be looking at Lane Kiffin's first win over Nick Saban in his collegiate career.
Yep, we could.
That is, that's all we got. Mike, I appreciate you taking some time to join me on today's show. We will be back first thing, probably come back Monday to recap the Alabama Ole Miss game. We'll probably record Sunday, and then we'll unleash it to everybody first thing Monday morning. Mike and I will both be at Bryant-Denny Stadium for that game. In the meantime, be sure to rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. Guys, you can get your subscription for $1 a month to start, then just $10 a month thereafter for the best coverage of your favorite college football team. Take advantage of that, especially if you're an Alabama fan. That's all we've got today, guys. We will catch you guys here in a few days after this game. Enjoy the show. Thanks so much for listening, whether it's us or Taylor Swift, and we will talk again soon.